Okay, so this problem talks about on Memorial Day, Tamira and her family went on a day trip to the outlet mall. They left their house at 9 a.m. and traveled at a constant speed for 70 miles per hour for 1 hour, arriving at the mall just as the stores opened. They shopped for 2 hours, and then they drove further away from their home for 15 minutes at a speed of 40 miles per hour. Then they stopped at the local cafe for an hour to enjoy some lunch. After the lunch break, they returned home, still at a constant speed, but traffic was very heavy. So they had to travel much more slowly than they had earlier in the day. When Tamira returned to school the next day, she shared the story of her trip with some classmates. Her teacher asked her to display the trip graphically. Tamira first created a grid to organize information for her graph and then divided it into 5 phases, given the length of time and the speed of the car for each phase of the trip. Okay, so step 1, let's make our grid. So the very first thing that Tamira did is she traveled at a constant speed of 70 miles per hour for 1 hour, arriving at the mall. So that's our first phase. Okay, so it was 1 hour and it was 70 miles per hour. Okay, next up we have, let's see, she shopped for 2 hours. So phase 2, let's see, it was 2 hours long. And she shopped for 2 hours, so the car was not going anywhere. Okay. Then what happens is she drove further away from home for 15 minutes at the speed of 40 miles per hour. Okay, so this one, we've got 15 minutes. Okay, and it was 40 miles per hour. Okay, and then they stopped. Do you see that? So this one, they stopped at local cafe for 1 hour to enjoy some lunch. Okay, so we have her stopping now for 1 hour. So stopped, she wasn't traveling at all. Okay, and then let's see. After the lunch break, they returned home still at a constant speed. So that means they're driving towards their house. Okay, so returned home. Still at a constant rate of change, but traffic was very heavy, so they were traveling slower than earlier in the day. Okay, so we don't know how long it took them because it doesn't say how long it took them, but we know it was slow. So we know it took we know it was not as fast as 70 miles an hour. Okay, so it's slower than 70. Okay, and that's going to be really your choice, what you end up wanting to do there. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's graph this information. So before they left the house, Tamira was at the house. She was at 0. Okay. And then she traveled 70 miles per hour for 1 hour. So that means that got her 70 miles away from the house. Okay. And it was a constant rate. So that tells us that that is going to be a straight line between the two. Okay. So constant rate means it's a straight line. So that's part A. Okay, and then she shopped for 2 hours. Okay. So she drove for an hour, she shopped for 2 hours. So now we're at 3 hours. Okay, so now we're at 3 hours, and she didn't travel at all. So she stayed 70 miles at 3 hours. Okay, and then part C, she did 15 minutes, okay, at 40 miles an hour. Okay, so let's just do some think work for a second. So if 1 hour, let's write this. If 1 hour, she drove 40 miles because it was 40 miles per hour, half an hour, okay, which is 30 minutes, she would have driven 20 miles, and that means 15 minutes, she would have gone 10. So she went 10 miles further, which is actually, if it was further, that means it's at 80 miles now. So we're at 80 miles now. And then it was only 15 minutes, so it's not a full hour. So that means it's a quarter of an hour. She was at 80. Okay, and that's again a straight line. Okay. Next up, she stayed there for an hour and ate lunch. So for 4 blocks, she stayed there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That looks good. Okay. And then let's see if I can move that. No, I can't. It's a little bit off, but that's okay. And then she slowly went back to her house. So slower than 70. So we could pick a number. So whatever number we want to pick for this is cool. So let's say she was going maybe 50 miles. Okay, so maybe she was going 50 miles from her house, or 50 miles per hour. Okay, so right now she's at 80 miles. Okay, and if she goes 50 miles per hour, okay, after 1 hour, she's only going to be 30 miles away. Okay, and then after 2 miles, she's going to be negative 20 miles. So between 1 and 2, she's going to be there. So at least an hour between 1 or 2. So that is how we graph this. Notice that the A part, the yellow, she's rising for an hour, so she's getting further and further from home. And the B, the green, is where she's staying at the mall. And then C is where she went to the cafe, so she drove a little bit further. Then she ate lunch where it's orange, and then she drove back home slower. So look at the steepness of the pink line is less than the yellow line.